The fifth step to developing a well-managed classroom and a well-disciplined classroom for you as a teacher is to use behavior management to increase acceptable behavior. To increase acceptable behavior. If you increase positive behavior, that may help reduce the negative behavior because the students really like receiving feedback and attention. So what is our action plan? We want to increase acceptable behavior. We want to prompt acceptable behavior. And we want to share acceptable behavior. I would like you to know it's usually best to think of behavior as acceptable or unacceptable rather than positive or negative. So acceptable or unacceptable. So how can we increase acceptable behavior? Catch them doing what you want them to do is a very good secret to increasing acceptable behavior. So I want you to know a behavior that is followed by appropriate positive reinforcement will occur more often in the future. So this is the principle, the key for increasing acceptable behavior. As soon as that acceptable behavior happens, especially if it's something that the students have not been doing and now they're doing like they should, you want to give, for example, as you see here, social reinforcers. How can we do that? We can do that by words of praise, by just telling the students, good job. Try not to say good job all the time, but have it with a little bit more of a reflective approach, okay? And there's some examples of words of praise there for you on page 118. Great job, nice going, exactly right. I really like that effort. Perfect arm placement. That's the best one yet. Way to go. Nice hustle. So these are examples of words of praise that I want you to know. Now, if you have to have some content or some effective praise instead of just the word good job, what would be an example that I want you to know? Excellent. You kept your elbow in to shoot your free throw. You've been teaching this and teaching this and teaching this. And now the students are finally doing it, or this particular student is doing it. So you have some effective praise right there with content as opposed to a repetition of good job, good job, good job. Physical expressions, smiling, nodding, thumbs up, holding a clenched fist over your head like, way to go. Clapping, winking. These are examples of physical expressions. You just got to be careful about physical contact. The handshake, may be okay. The high five may be okay. But depending on the school and your school district, you need to find out what's acceptable for physical contact. Activity reinforcers I want you to know about. Activities that will reinforce a class, because sometimes you have to have activity reinforcers because the majority of the class is not behaving right. So you use activities that the children enjoy as reinforcers. So I want you to know activities that will reinforce a class include offering free time. That's how I came up my Andrus relay game. I gave them 10 minutes of free time or 5 minutes of free time at the end of a 50-minute PE class, a health lesson, because they didn't want to be there as long as they behaved 45 minutes for me, because I had 30 hormonal 8th graders in the class that didn't want to be there. So sometimes free time will work to practice what they want to practice. Also, I want you to know you can do token reinforcers. And some examples of token reinforcers that I want you to know: points, ribbons, certificates. So you can also, so these are examples of token reinforcers, but this usually works best with primary grade children who are motivated to receive them. After the age of 9, they see tokens as a form of bribery to get you to behave in a certain manner. So be careful with token reinforcers. For the little ones, it's good. How do you select reinforcers? Fortunately, I want you to know for most children, the praise, the attention, the smiles, the games, the free time, that'll work. So you got to find out what motivates your class. The pre-MAC principle. I want you to know what the pre-MAC principle is that most teachers use unknowingly and most parents use unknowingly. The pre-MAC principle states that a highly desirable activity can be used to motivate students to learn an activity they find less desirable. We use this all the time as parents to get our kids to eat vegetables because they don't want to eat vegetables. If you eat your vegetables, then I'll give you some ice cream. Or if you do this for me, then I'll let you do this. They give an example. You may shoot baskets, which is what they want to do, after you complete a passing drill because they don't want to do the passing drill. Once you get through the first moves without music, which is the less desirable, then we'll turn on the music to do the part of the dance with the music, which is what they prefer. So you're persuading them to do what they don't want to do, and then you'll reward them with something they do like to do. So the pre-MAC principle, we use that a lot as teachers, and you need to know what that is. So we talked about how to increase acceptable behavior. Now let's look at the second way to prompt acceptable behavior. How can we do this? So I want you to know prompts are used to remind students to behave acceptably and encourage the development of new patterns of behavior. So what are some common ways? Number one that I want you to know, modeling, teacher demonstration. This is why I have stressed to you tremendously to either do a teacher demonstration or a student demonstration. And whenever you're placing the equipment or whatever it may be to prompt that specific behavior you want the students to do. Placing your piece of equipment on the floor when stopping a class reminds the class to do the same thing. So what are you demonstrating to the students as acceptable behavior? They follow along with that. Not so much the demonstration of how to do the activity, but what are you doing with the equipment? How are you behaving? How are you talking to the student? Number two is how you're talking to the student, your verbal cues. To pace the lesson, to increase the intensity of the performance, to motivate the students to stay on task. Are you using cues like hustle or keep going to remind them that this is an acceptable behavior as opposed to being sluggish and just lagging behind? Nonverbal cues that I want you to know, your body language. Your physical cues are given through your body language to communicate the hustle or to quiet down and so forth. So you have to learn your body language and what are you sending to those students. They talk about shaping acceptable behavior. But before we go to that, I want you to look in your book on page 120 because they talk about fading. Let's talk about fading because that's a very important concept that I want you to know about for tests and to apply. The first thing I want you to know is that your goal is to eventually remove prompts so that the behavior is self-motivated and you won't have to continually prompt those students. And that's what we call fading. Avoid using prompts so much that students will not perform without them. The process of gradually removing the prompts so that the behavior is self-motivated is called fading. You want to get it to a point where you don't have to continually remind them of what they should do and so forth. You want to try and get it to where they're motivated to do it on their own. They talk about in the book that I want you to know, instead of a prompt, you could give students a long lecture about the importance of staying on task. But lectures are time consuming and ineffective in the long run. So hopefully, eventually you can remove those prompts. You don't have to continually prompt the students, and that's called fading. Now we can go on to shaping acceptable behavior. I want you to know when a behavior is unacceptable, you might have to use what we call shaping techniques to create the new behavior. So I want you to know these two types of shaping techniques. Two steps, or well, not two types, but two steps for shaping your students. The first step is called using differential reinforcement to increase the incidence of acceptable behavior. What are they talking about here? You reinforce responses that reach a predetermined criterion, and you ignore those students that do not meet the criteria. For instance, if you ask the class to put the equipment down quickly, and you decide that students should put their equipment on the floor within 5 seconds, that shouldn't take long. You're going to use this differential reinforcement by reinforcing those students who meet the 5-second criteria. You're going to tell them good job, and those students who are taking longer to put the equipment down on the floor, you're going to ignore them. So this is called differential reinforcement. There's a difference here. You got those who are actually doing what they should be doing. You had told the class that within 5 seconds, bam, put the equipment on the floor. If they're having a lazy attitude or a don't want attitude, you're going to reinforce those who do it, and you're going to ignore those who don't do it. The second step is to expand the criterion that must be reached for reinforcement to occur. What does that mean? We want the students to get quiet within 5 seconds after receiving a signal. Well, it may not actually happen in 5 seconds. You may actually have to do a 12-second expectation. Why would you do it longer? Because it's unreasonable to expect them to quiet down quickly. So you'll let it slide to about 12 seconds and then gradually reduce it to 5 seconds. Okay? So your goal is to get it down to 5 seconds, but you'll let it slide when it's longer, but eventually you'll have the criteria met. So they call that expansion of the criteria. So these are the two steps, that one of the two or both, depending on the situation, that could be followed to try and shape the behavior of the class.